The Christian in Complete Armor by William Gurnall. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 17a. And take the helmet of salvation. Chapter 14. An exaltation to them that want this helmet of hope. Be ye exhorted, who are yet without this helmet, to provide yourselves with it. Certainly, if you be in your right mind, it is the first thing you will go about, and that with earnestness, especially if these three considerations take place in your thoughts. Section 1. How deplorable a thing it is to be in a hopeless state. The Apostle, Ephesians chapter 2:12, makes him to be without God, that is, without hope, having no hope, and being without God in the world. God to the soul is what the soul is to the body. If that be so vile and noisome a thing, when it hath lost the soul that keeps it sweet, what is thy soul when nothing of God is in it? The heart of the wicked is little worth, saith Solomon. And why? But because it hath not God to put a value on it? If God, who is light, be not in thy understanding, thou art blind. And what is an eye whose sight is out fit for, but to help thee to break thy neck? If God be not in thy conscience to pacify and comfort it, thou must needs to be full of horror or void of sense, a raging devil or a stupid atheist. If God be not in thy heart and affections to purify them, thou art but a sink of sin. If God be not in thee, the devil is, for man's heart is a house that cannot stand empty. In a word, thou canst not well be without this hope, neither in life nor death. Not in life, for what comfort canst thou take in this life without the hope of a better? A sad legacy it is which shuts the rebellious child from all claim to the inheritance. Thou hast an estate, it may be, but it is all you must look for. And is it not a danger at the heart of thy joy to think thy portion is paid thee here, which will be spent by that time the saint comes to receive his? Much less tolerable is it to be without this hope in a dying hour. Who can, without horror, think of leaving this world, though full of sorrows, who hopes for no ease in the order? The condemned malefactor, as ill as he likes his smoky hole in the prison, hath rather be there than acceptance of deliverance at the hangman's hand. He had rather live still in his loathsome dungeon than exchange it for a gibbet. The greater reason hath the hopeless soul, if he understands himself, to wish he may spend his eternity on earth, though in the poorest hole in it, and that under the most exquisite torment, than to be eased of pain here, and receive hell's torment hereafter. Hence is a sad confusion in the thoughts of the guilty wretches when their souls are summoned out of their body. This makes the very pains of death stronger than they would be if these dear friends had but a hopeful parting. If the shrink and mournful outcry of some friends in the room of a dying man may so disturb him as to make his passage more terrible, how much more then must the horror of the sinner's own conscience, under the apprehensions of that hell, whether it is going, amaze and affrighten him? There is a great difference between a wife's parting with her husband when called from her to live at court under the shine of his prince's favor, whose return after a while she accepts with an acclamation of wealth and honor, and another whose husband is taken out of her arms to be dragged to prison and torment. Is this thy case, and art thou cutting thy life short out into chips, and spending thy little time upon trifles when the salvation of thy soul is yet to be wrought out? Art thou trimming thy slimy carcass, while thy soul is dropping into hell? What is this but to be painting the door when the house is on fire? It was an unseizable time for Belshazzar to be feasting and quaffing when his kingdom lay at stake and an enemy at the gates. It would have become a wise prince to have been rather fighting on the wall than feasting in his palace and fattening himself for his own slaughter, which soon befell him. Daniel 5:30. It would become thee better to call upon thy God, poor sinner, and lie in tears for thy sins at his foot, if yet haply thy pardon may be obtained, than by wallowing in thy sensual pleasure to stupefy thy conscience and lay it asleep, by which thou canst only gain a little ease from the troublesome thoughts of thy approaching misery. Section 2. Consider, it is possible that thou, who art now without hope, may by a timely and vigorous use of the means obtain a hope of salvation, and certainly a possible hope carries in it a force of a strong argument to endeavor for an actual hope. There is not a devil in hell so bad, but if he had 1,000 worlds at his disposal, and every one better than this, which we so dote on, would change them all for such a hope. It was but a possibility which brought that heathen king of Nineveh from his throne to lie groveling at God's foot in sackcloth and ashes. And that king will rise up in judgment against thee, if thou dost not more. For that was a possibility more remote than thine is. It took place not from any express promise that dropped from the preacher to encourage them to humble themselves and turn to the Lord. For we read of nothing but desolation denounced, but from that natural theology which was imprinted on their minds. This taught them to hope that he who is the chief good would not be implacable. But you have made express promises from God's faithful lip, that if you in his time and way seek him, as sure as he is now in heaven, you shall live there with him in glory. Your heart shall live that seek God. Psalms 69 verse 32. Yet there are millions of blessed ones now in heaven experiencing the truth of this, who once had no more hope of heaven than yourselves now have, and that blissful place is not yet crowded so full that he can and will make room for you if you have a mind to go thither. There is one prayer which Christ made on earth that will keep heaven's gates open for all who believe on him unto the end of the world. John chapter 17 verse 20. Neither pray I for these, but for them that shall believe on me through their word. This is good news indeed. Methinks it should make your souls leap within your breast, while you sit under the invitations of the gospel, as the babe once did in Elizabeth's womb upon the Virgin Mary's salutation. Say not then, sinners, that ministers put you upon impossibilities and bid you climb a hill inaccessible. No, it is the devil and thy own unbelieving heart, who together conspire thy ruin and tell thee so. And as long as you listen to these counselors, you are likely to do well, are you not? Well, whatever they say, know, sinner, that if at last thou missest heaven, which God forbid, the Lord can wash his hands over your head and clear himself of your blood. Thy damnation will be laid at thine own door. It will then appear there was no cheat in the promise, no sorcery in the gospel, but thou didst voluntarily put eternal life from thee, whatever thy lying lips uttered to the contrary. My people would have none of me. Psalms 81 verse 11. So that when the jury shall sit on thy murdered soul, to inquire how thou camest to thy miserable end, thou wilt be found guilty of thy own damnation. No one loses God but he that is willing to part with him. Now thirdly, consider the horrid cruelty of this act, by thy incorrigible and impenitent heart, to pull down eternal destruction on thy own head. Oh, what a sad epithet is this to be on a man's gravestone. Here lies one that cut his own throat. This is the man that would not be reclaimed. He saw hell before him, and yet would leap into it, notwithstanding the entreaties of Christ by his Spirit, and ministers to the contrary. And the oftener thou hast attempted to do it, and God hath been staying thy hand by his gracious salutations, the greater will be thy shame and confusion before God, men, and angels at the last day. God hath set a brand upon those acts of cruelty, which a man commits upon himself above all others. It would show a man to be of a harsh, cruelish nature, that could see his horse in his stable, or hog at his sty, starve, when he hath meat to lay before him. More cruel still to hear thy servant cry out for bread, and denied it. Yet more horrid, if this were done to a child or wife, but of all, because nature cries loudest for self-preservation. The greatest violency that can possibly be done to the law of nature is to forget the duty we owe to our own life. What is it then for a sinner to starve his soul by rejecting Christ, the bread of life, and to let out his soul's blood at this wide slough? This is a matchless cruelty. Indeed, that which makes the self-murder of the body so great a crime is because it doth so eminently hazard the destruction of the soul. O how unworthy then art thou to have a noble a guest as thy soul dwelling in thy bosom, who preparest no better lodging than hell for it in another world. That soul whose nature makes it capable of being preferred to the blissful presence of God in heaven's glory, if thou hast not bolted the door against thyself by thy impenitency. But alas, this which is the worst murder is most common. They are but a few monsters that we now and then hear of, who lay violent hands upon their bodies, at the report of which the whole country trembleth. But you can hardly go into thy house in which you shall not find some attempting to make away with their souls, yea, that carry the very knife in their bosoms, their beloved sins, I mean, with which they stab them, even those who are full of natural affections to their bodies, so as to be willing to spend all that they are worth with her in the gospel and physicians, when the life of it is in danger. Yet so cruel to their undying souls that they turn to Christ their physician out of doors, who comes to cure them of free cost. In a word, those that discover that abundancy of wisdom and discretion in ordering their worldly affairs, you would wonder how rationally they are, when an account they will give why they do this and why that. When it comes to the business of heaven and the salvation of their souls, they are not like the same men. So that were you to judge them only by their actions herein, you could not believe them to be men. And it is not sad that the soul which furnishes you with the reason for the dispatch of your worldly business should have no benefit itself from that very reason which it lends you to do all your other business with? This, as one well saith, is as if the master of the house who provides food for all his servants should be himself kept by them from eating, and so remain the only starved creature in the house. And is not this the sad judgment and plague of God that is visibly seen upon many, and those that go for wise men too? Are not their souls, which give them understanding to provide for back and belly, house and family, themselves starving in the meantime, being kept by the power of some lust from making use of their understanding and reason so far as to put them upon any serious and vigorous endeavor for the salvation of them? End of Ephesians chapter 6, verse 17a, chapter 14. End of verse 17a section. Having been read by Peter John Paresis.